Hey everyone, this is Ventrua and this is my Hexblast Trickster guide. First, a quick explanation of how my POB works. As per usual, there is quite an extensive notes section, mostly for leveling, but it also has some endgame crafting tips at the end. And if you want to check out skill trees for different part of progression, you can change them here. But make sure to also change the items and the skill sets. First, let's take a look at Hexblast and how it works, since it's very unusual compared to other skills. So even though we deal pure chaos damage, the actual damage monsters take is actually based on their lowest resistance instead. We use this by lowering the enemy's elemental resistance, specifically fire usually, by using flammability, elemental weakness, exposure, and combustion. Another interesting thing about the skill is that all damage can freeze, ignite, and shock, as long as you either have the chance to do so or you crit, which shouldn't be a problem in this build as we are a crit-based build. The last important mechanic is that the skill does more damage against enemies that are hexed. We use this in combination with Curse on Hit, and we pretty much always get this 100% more damage bonus. This skill actually has extremely high damage, and the reason why it is so is because it's balanced by its cast time, being 1 second, which, I mean, by a smart way of playing the game, we just put it on a mine, and then this is no longer an issue, because it's suddenly based on mine throw speed, and the cast time doesn't matter at all. And by having a low crit chance, which honestly is a little bit of an issue early on, but it's good enough for the early progression, and in the end game we completely bypass this by using Sandstone Vestige Helmet to have base crit of 10 or 11, so both of the downsides are very well mitigated by the way we build the character. Now time to answer the question that I get asked the most when I talk about this build, and that is why Trickster. I personally stand by the fact that Trickster is the best ascendancy for this build, but as far as I know, the Saboteur is more popular, even Occultist is more popular on softcore. But why do we choose Trickster? Well, the main reason to choose Trickster is that early on especially, you get a lot of throw speed with 1 step ahead and Swift Killer. You also get good damage with Polymath, and then especially endgame you get some nice defense from Spellbreaker. Sabo gets early shock and ignite immunity, which is actually really nice, but we obtain those later on through Gearing. And regen, which actually used to be a huge problem for Trickster. But thanks to the new Call to Arms support that allows us to use Enduring Cry for additional recovery, which is then further enhanced by Restless Ward, Body Armor giving us more regen, this is no longer a big issue. Occultist actually does a lot of damage, but it just completely lacks defense. If you prefer ZHP playstyle, you could actually go for Occultist power charge stacking, but personally that's just not how I like to play the game. I've also seen some people play Hexblast on Pathfinder, and honestly, I'm just not a big Pathfinder fan myself when it comes to Hexblast. I know there's some setups that can be good, but I just wouldn't recommend league starting it in the first place. So what is this build actually good for? I think the main strength of this build is how early it is able to do Sanctum, and how easy it can do Sanctum. Having good damage and freeze is pretty much all you need in Sanctum, and this build just ticks both boxes. Later on, it should also be good for bossing at the new tier 17 maps, but we don't actually know the exact difficulty of them, but I can't imagine this endgame version of the build actually struggling with that. For a Sanctum / bossing build, this build can actually map quite decently. But honestly, if you are looking for a mapping build, I would just recommend something else, like for example the Cast on Crit DD Inquisitor that I have also made a guide for. To level this build, we use Stormblast Mine until level 28. Make sure to actually use Orb of Storms on blue packs and rares and bosses, as it enhances your damage greatly. At level 28, we swap to Pyroclast, and we don't face any issues with damage at all the way until Kitava, where we will be swapping to Hexblast. Unlike most leveling builds, this one actually has very low socket pressure, which is a nice change of pace since it makes the leveling process a lot more comfortable. Make sure to check out the leveling trees here to see where you should be traveling on the skill tree and what you should be taking. Our Ascendancy order starts by picking up 1 step ahead and then Swift Killer. You could also switch them up because Swift Killer actually gives more mine throw speed from charge mines, but I prefer 1 step ahead as it also gives you move speed and freeze immunity. Third, we take Polymath as there is no real reason to take it early on because we don't have that many masteries early, but it becomes a very strong damage node by the time we are in Merciless Lab. And lastly, in Uber Lab we will take Escape Artist, and once we get action speed on boots, we will drop 1 step ahead in favor of Spellbreaker. To swap to Hexblast, you absolutely need Curse on Hit. Most common source at this point will be a Dreadarch Unique Axe, but there are other alternatives, such as Corrupted Gloves with a Curse, ideally Elemental Weakness, or a rare ring with Flammability, Frostbite, Conductivity, or Elemental Weakness, that can come from Delve or Influence rings. One thing that's important to note, Mark of Submission doesn't work with traps and mines, so don't try to use this, it will not work and your build will not function properly. We'll also be running Blasphemy with Elemental Weakness, or Flammability if we have Elemental Weakness Gloves or Ring. Until we get Profane Proxy, then we will be switching to Skitterbots as we no longer need Blasphemy. Another important thing you need to pay attention to is the mana situation. You want to be able to reserve 20 active mines, which is our limit on how many mines we can actually have, and still be able to throw another set of mines, which means that the mana cost here needs to be lower than the amount of unreserved mana you can see here. Just make sure that's actually always true for PoB. I do address that in the way I build my character, but in case you are doing something slightly different or you are at a different stage of progression, make sure that is the case, because otherwise the build will start feeling really clunky since you won't be able to use your skills properly sometimes. Time to go over the gem setup that you should have when you are swapping to Hexblast. Your Hexblast should be linked to Blast Chain Mine, Charge Mines, and Minefield. And your 5 link should always be increased crit strikes, and your 6 link is most likely gonna be Void Manipulation. You can also use Trap and Mind Damage if you feel like your throw speed is already good at this stage, but I think early on Void Manipulation will just perform better. So why do we actually use Blast Chain over High Impact? Most people you will see will be using High Impact, but that is because they are playing Saboteur. The Saboteur Demolition Specialist node gives increased effect of the High Impact aura by 150%, and it's the only reason why High Impact is actually a good choice there. For other Ascendancies, I feel like it's pretty much never worth using High Impact as it gets worse than Blast Chain. At already 6 mines in a sequence, which happens pretty much all the time when you use Minefield with Trickster throw speed. High Impact has one advantage, and that is it provides better shock and freezes sometimes, even though it might be a little inconsistent. I still prefer Blast Chain though, because it can be a very noticeable damage difference on any fight where you can pre-stack, and those are very common in Sanctum and Bossing. For other gems, we have Shield Charge Faster Attacks for mobility, Cast when Damage Taken level 1 with Immortal Call level 3, which we actually do have Endurance charges for now, thanks to the new Call to Arms support linked to Enduring Cry, which fixes both of the issues Trickster used to have: recovery and physical damage mitigation. Then we have Flame Dash, we have Blasphemy Elemental Weakness. As I said, you need to run this until you get Profane Proxy, Grace, or Zealotry if you are farming Sanctums and you feel like you don't need Grace. A 4-link Wither Totem setup. With Spell Totem, Wither, Multi-Totem, and faster casting, we'll be using this until we get a different way of applying Wither, but you only use this on bosses. Bear Trap can be kept at level 1 since leveling up doesn't matter, but it is a significant damage increase. And Withering Step to increase the way we apply Wither and make it a little more consistent. Depending on how the new automation support actually functions, we might actually want to use it in combination with Detonate Mines in our last 2 sockets. If the cooldown is actually 0.2 as the cooldown of Detonate Mines, it would be pretty good. If the cooldown is 0.6, I'm not sure how impactful it actually would be, but it requires in-game testing and I cannot do that. You can also use a Mind Mastery for detonating while moving. Personally, I'm just gonna be holding spacebar for my detonation, but I think a lot of people would prefer the Mastery that lets them detonate when they move, and then have a separate key button that they could press when they are standing still throwing mines. We tried to run clusters on this build extremely early on because they are super strong for this build. For our large cluster, ideally we would go for 8-point chaos, but those will probably be expensive, so you can go with 8-point spell damage. The actual rolls on it don't matter too much, you can honestly just go without a notable if you don't want to spend time rolling it. It doesn't matter much, eventually you will be swapping to a chaos cluster anyways. The important thing and the reason why we want to go cluster is the medium clusters. The medium trap and mind damage clusters are just insane for this build. The way you craft them is you reforge crit, and it guarantees surprise sabotage, and you press it until you also hit Gorilla Tactics, which is literally the most common mod you can roll, and it takes about 4 reforge crits on average, and the cluster gives you so much damage, throw speed, move speed, and crit multi. The pen mod on this cluster also works, because as we talked about before, the damage is actually based on the lowest resistance rather than chaos resistance, and if we reduce the elemental resistance to be lower than chaos, we can also penetrate it with this cluster. I also recommend running a small reservation cluster with Grace reservation efficiency, or if you are farming Sanctum and you would rather have Zealotry over Grace, you can roll it with Zealotry reservation efficiency. If you are rolling for Grace and reservation efficiency clusters are too expensive early on, you can also use an evasion cluster and roll Sublime Form on that one. Getting the character to this state shouldn't be too difficult, as the day 1 gear should be pretty easy to obtain. Dread Arc should be 1C hopefully. Shield, we are looking for a shield with crit chance and either spell damage or +1 chaos. Helmet, ideally we'll look for a helmet that has an open prefix for a fist taken craft, as that is our greatest weakness. Early 5-link Restless Ward, eventually we probably wanna switch to a 6-link, even though endgame we will be crafting a rare chest. Duadress Tenure, super strong, cheap gloves, shouldn't be more than a few chaos at worst. Give you 100% spell damage, and the reduced cast speed doesn't actually affect our throw speed, so they are just 25-30% more damage at most stages of early progression. Boots, nothing special. Amulet, here we can reforge chaos until we hit +1 chaos, since it's very common, it's like 1 in 5, 1 in 6, or we can just try to buy a decent one. There's also a craft on suffixes that gives you mind throw speed, so you can get more damage there. Nothing special about the rings, just try to get as much resist as possible, as the build needs some resist. And on a belt, if you are actually feeling like you have extra zeal essences, you can throw them on belt and try to craft a throw speed belt, since it cannot actually get throw speed for mines and in any other way. But if you don't have this mod, don't worry about it, we can just live without it, just get life resist on the belt instead. Clusters we already talked about, and for rare jewels, we are looking for spell damage, crit multi, and life. Our endgame setup actually uses 2 build enabling uniques. The first one is Sandstorm Visage. This makes your crit chance instead of the 4% that Hexblast usually has, based on the crit chance of your main hand weapon, which for wands is usually 10%, 11% depending on how we roll it, which makes it more than 2.5 times the crit we would usually have. This comes from Sanctum, and you can run it yourself if you buy the Chains of Castigation relic, or you can just buy it, but it might be quite expensive early on, as Sanctum runners usually tend to not run that relic. The other unique that I would consider build enabling is Profane Proxy. Make sure you socket this in the right ring, as this way we are only losing the Shocking Skitterbot aura, which we don't need since Hexblast already shocks. And what this allows us to do is replace our Blasphemy aura with a Skitterbot instead, and have the curse socketed in the Profane Proxy instead of using a Blasphemy link. For the gear that I would consider difficult to craft, there is actually a notes section at the bottom of notes, but I will still go over it real quick. For wand, you want a wand with either fractured spell damage on prefix or fractured crit chance on the suffix. You are looking for an implicit with spell damage. Make sure the int requirement isn't too high depending on how much int you have on your build. And the way you wanna roll it is you use free socket resonator with corroded, metallic, and shattering, and every 12 tries you will actually hit +2, and spell damage if you haven't had it fractured, but if you had it fractured it's just gonna be there. And if the suffixes fill up, you try to hit and annul to remove a suffix. Craft prefix is gonna be changed, and then reforge crit or weld orb based on the price of those. But honestly, chaos crafting for weapons is just so much easier than anything else that this weapon is not even unreasonable for chaos. The base of the wand doesn't actually matter too much as long as it has spell damage, since this build is actually overcapped on crit in PoB, and if you were to use a 7% base crit wand, it would still be okay. But if you can get 8% base crit wand, it is just better. For shield, we are looking for a Shaper shield with either 10% or 15 spell damage implicit. And then we spam Scorn Essences until we hit Reservation Efficiency and ideally some resist or something. You craft suffix is gonna be changed, Reforge Chaos for guaranteed +1, and then we finish the craft with crafting life. For body armor, we are looking for a high ES evasion piece. Ideally with an open prefix where we can craft Fist Taken as Fire and Lightning, the Gravious craft, and implicits would be Crit Multi and Grace Effect. Or Zealotry Effect if you are only farming Sanctum and you are running Zealotry instead. For gloves, we are looking for Fire Exposure and Unnerve, otherwise nothing special. For boots, we wanna use a Loathing Essence and then an implicit for Avoid Ailment. In combination with Ancestral Vision and 100% Spell Suppression, this actually gives us Ailment Immunity. The other implicit is just action speed, and once we get action speed, we no longer need one step ahead as it loses a lot of value, and we switch our ascendancy to the suppression node. For amulet, here I think you either want fractured attributes or fractured life, and you spam Scorn Essence until you hit a decent suffixes. Then again, suffix is gonna be changed, Reforge Chaos, guaranteed +1, should be quite easy. The unknown we go for is Skittering Runes, as it gives us 50% increase AoE, and it's just very nice and comfy. For ring, this ring is obviously pretty good. I showed the way to craft it in in the nodes, but you don't need a ring this good. All you need is a ring that has any curse on it. You can either buy it from Delvers or you can craft it by reforging caster or any influence ring. What you actually ideally want is elemental weakness, but flammability, frostbite, and conductivity can do as well. Just make sure that if you are not using elemental weakness on hit, you actually put elemental weakness in your profane proxy instead of the normal curse. Belt is nothing too special. You want to get a decent Stygian and then 100 slam it for a prefix. You pretty much cannot lose. You will most likely hit percent life or chaos damage. Both are really good. I would recommend crafting belt with a Zeal Essence if you are actually going for your endgame belt until you hit decent suffixes and life. When it comes to clusters, we want to use chaos clusters in the endgame, ideally with Unholy Grace and Touch of Cruelty on the way to our jewels. The medium jewels don't change, it's still trap and mine damage with Gorilla Tactics and Surprise Sabotage. We also play double cluster because clusters are just that good. I use Watcher's Eye in this build, it's just Grace Evade. You can go for other stuff, but I think this is the single best mod that you can go for. Lethal Pride in this slot, it only hits 3 nodes, which is not amazing, but what you can get on it is fist damage taken as fire or double damage. Both of those mods are really good, so I would suggest looking for those if you are gonna go for it. One of the reasons to use Lethal Pride is that it gives us extra strength, which we kinda lack. Lastly, since we don't want to be using Wither Totems forever, we want to get Balance of Terror with Inflict Wither on hit if you have cast Despair. We don't actually use Despair to curse enemies, we use Despair to just cast it anywhere and get this buff for 10 seconds. Interestingly enough, since they buff Unholy Might, you can actually use Sin's Rebirth early on to Inflict Wither instead. And if you can grab it for cheap, it is very very strong as it lasts 10 seconds and that should be more than enough time to kill basically any boss. Overall, I think this build is actually very solid for Sanctum and bossing and hopefully for the new tier 17 maps. I tried to build it in a way where it has a lot of damage and decent defense at the same time. DC HP numbers are without Immortal Call. If you actually click it with Endurance charges on, obviously it inflates the numbers greatly, but I didn't want it to look too crazy. And I think this is more than good enough for softcore defenses. I don't think you will be dying, falling over all the time. I think you will die sometimes, especially to fist damage. But I don't think it's gonna be a problem. You should be able to level up without any issues to like 97, 98, doing pretty much any content you wanna do. The gear that is gonna be used in the showcase is pretty much the gear you would expect to have on day 1. Dread Arc, Dread Destiner, Restless Ward, Helmet with resist and a little bit of life, rings with some resist, belt with strength and resist, amulet with mind throw speed, which could be crafted. I intentionally didn't craft life because I already bought the amulet like this, so just pretend the mind throw speed is crafted and it's pretty much fine. Boots, just life resist, nothing special, and a shield with a little crit chance and a little bit of spell damage crafted life. Level 19 gem and a 5 link. Otherwise, nothing special about this build as it is right now. Clusters, I'm using a white 8 passive spell damage and these medium clusters, which are really easy to grab with Reforged Grid. And my sculpture, in case anyone's curious, just the Ascendancy. Let's see how it does. So we're just starting floor 4 here. I do have monsters at 30% less maximum life, unfortunately, but otherwise nothing too important when it comes to afflictions or boons. It's a zone level 76 Sanctum, and let's see how we do. I'm gonna mute and focus on the Sanctum. Enjoy the gameplay.
feed the beast all that it desires. I have an eternity. You are only wasting your own limited time. Rise, my servant! You cannot escape Vedat's gaze! Playing with fire will get you burned. Stop interrupting my work. You cannot escape Vedat's gaze. The scourge will consume this world of sinners. You will know pain. Inevitable. I will bathe this world in blood. Impressive, but futile. Inevitable. You will know pain. Die. You know this.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to subscribe if you like the content. There's a lot more to come as the league starts. That's it. Goodbye.